Okay, so I think I'm live, and I'm just going to go ahead and keep going because I think I am live on YouTube right now. So, without further ado, let's take a look and see what we have on the Explorer's ship for self-directed learning today. All right, let's get out of my office here. I updated the YouTube book reviews. So I got all of the books that I particularly enjoy. There's a bunch more that I have to review, but I'll get to those. And if you're looking to do a little book study on my own book, I've got a link here that should go, hey, all right, to the actual book that I wrote and is published through Corwin Publishing. So feel free to come on over to the Captain's Quarters. Check that out. Um, Honestly, I really think that this is what I want to talk about today. My newest development, exploring who we are and how we learn. This five-layer model. I mean, it's huge. There's a lot there, and when I show this to people, it usually they're taken aback for a moment because it's a lot. It's like nothing's explained. It's just a bunch of words. It's a bunch of colors. It's pretty. It's pretty. It looks really nice, Greg. Way to go. But there's so much that explains who we are and how we learn in this model that I kind of want to go through that today. I think that would be fun for me. And if, of course, if you're watching and you see the link in the text below, there should be a link to visit this space. So feel free to jump in and chat with me because that's what this space is for. If you click on the link below, if you visit this gather town and I'm here, you can have a quick Zoom call with me. And if there's other people here, you don't have to do a breakout room. You just move your avatar over to where they are. So it's a really easy way of having group chats within a larger group. You know what I mean? So that's fun. Okay, so this is actually in a blog post. Man, I would rather talk about that, huh? That's a good one. Standards-based grading. This is something that I've actually. These are 5 fundamental principles to my standards-based grading approach, which is pretty cool. My social emotional learning framework. I just posted a video about that earlier today. And self-directed learning. My gosh. Oh, this is a really cool video that if you haven't yet, definitely want to check that out because the concept of starting with one is a fantastic perspective that if you're feeling kind of overwhelmed about all of the different education reform movements, that's a pretty nice video to kind of reground you. Oh, and there's also a video here where I get into some of the weeds, the nitty gritty of the culture and self directed learning. So that one, check out. But of course, when you first get it here, you want to watch the intro video. I kind of talk about some of the things. This is another one I want to get into. I'm just going to head back to that initial poster that I wanted to talk about. Oh, and if you do happen to jump on board, haha, board, it's a ship. Definitely sign the welcome aboard guest, I don't know, guest log. So, let me know you were here. Include your tags, include your whatever social media tags, and I will connect with you. All right, so let's head over here to this new development, exploring who we are and how we learn. Now, there are 5 layers in this model, and I explore individual, social, and societal factors responsible for who we are and how we learn. Now, schools struggling to implement new programs and initiatives may want to reflect on the layers in this model to strengthen their vision and approach to introducing change in the school and community. So If you have a really cool vision and everyone's on board, they love it, but what's actually happening in the school doesn't align with the vision, then the idea here is that there's a reason for that, and I'm working on is essentially an exploration into why a vision isn't matching the practices. And so you have 5 layers. This outside layer, way out here in the white, it's supposed to be a little yellow. There's supposed to be a yellow tint to it, but it kind of looks white to me. So this outer layer is the 7 elements of culture. And when it comes to classrooms, norms and traditions is the one that most teachers are most interested right off the bat. How do you come into a classroom? How do you leave? How do you ask permission to leave the classroom, to use the restroom and things? How do you ask a question? Do you speak when you're spoken to, or are you free to speak when you have a question or a comment? There's all of these different norms to a classroom setting that teachers want to talk about, like which ones are good, which ones are bad, which ones are effective, which ones are not. And it's hard to say that one set of norms and traditions are better because people are different. There's lots of different people, and when you get lots of different people in a group, the dynamic of the group is then unique. And so it's that's kind of what makes education so difficult. And that's why I'm putting this model together to explore exactly that. So norms and traditions is usually where teachers want to start talking about, you talk about self-directed learning, what does it look like? They're talking about norms and traditions. However, if you are able to identify the norms and traditions in your classroom, to break down in any kind of way that you want, entering and exiting a room, all of the things I listed. If you try to change those, chances are there are larger school-wide norms and traditions that you're going to find is conflicting. The reason why you are able to change your norms and traditions in your classroom is because you have autonomy over your classroom government, you as the teacher. Now, if a student tried to change the norms and traditions of the classroom, they would also come up against, some sort of pushback, some sort of conflict, because the structure of the classroom government probably doesn't allow for the student to change the norms and traditions. Or maybe it does. And so you see how already you got 2 elements of culture that are dependent upon one another. Then you consider resources as another element. How do the collection and distribution of different resources, how does that fit into a classroom? How does it fit into a school? How does it fit into a community? All of these beliefs about how resources should be collected and redistributed, all of those beliefs play into the kinds of government structures and the norms and traditions that we are talking about. So it's easy to kind of get tripped up in thinking, well, I just want to know about the classroom. Well, and so I'm talking about how the classroom is within a school and the school is within a community, and so it gets really complicated really fast. Well, Greg, can't you just make this easy? Well, that's what this model is going to be trying to do. And so as I continue working on this model, my goal, because I think I've fleshed out the model enough so that really it's a matter of getting this model and teasing out and gaming out how all of these elements work in real life classrooms today. Because I know how these worked in my classroom. And there was a clear separation between how I chose to do things, how I ran the decision-making hierarchy or the government of my classroom. And it was actually surprisingly egalitarian in the second half of the year. But because my students that would come to me, whether they were in 7th grade or 5th grade or 3rd grade, they weren't used to an egalitarian decision-making structure. And so there was a lot of hesitancy, which made progress very, very slow. So I start the school year with a more traditional hierarchical structure where I'm basically an autocrat, allowing students to make decisions for themselves. And so that's not ideal as far as I'm concerned, but it's what the students are usually used to by the time they get to third or fifth or seventh grade. And so I start them there, and then I eventually introduce concepts and I let out the rope a little bit, so that the government structure changes and it shifts. And a lot of teachers already do this. And it's the whole idea of getting students in the classroom at the first day, the first week, the first month, and going over routines and procedures. That's a really normal part of school culture. But it's because the teacher is deciding what kind of decisional structure, government structure, the classroom is going to need to all get on the same page about in order to develop the norms and traditions that align with that government structure, which includes how resources are collected and redistributed. And so then a lot of that depends on this other element of culture, structural relationships. That government structure within a classroom will define the structural relationship between a teacher and a student. And so if a teacher believes that the teacher is there to teach the stuff, I'm a content expert, and the students, if they just listen and do what I tell them, they're going to be successful. Well, that's a structural relationship between the teacher and the student that some students, when they go home, their parents may or may not have that kind of relationship with them. So some students are going to struggle with that more than others. And so you get these elements of culture on this outer rim here where, language, art and literature and how it reflects culture and philosophy that underpins all of this. You really start to break down exactly what it is about your classroom that is your classroom culture. So once you're able to really define these things, then you go one layer in. That's the fifth layer. The fourth layer is this purple layer where you have fairness, responsibility, respect, integrity, community, and trust. These are values that we think are common sense. We think that everyone agrees what respect means. But honestly, respect in one classroom could mean something completely different than respect in another. Respect in one home could mean something completely different than another. Respect in one school campus could be explained and understood differently than an entirely different school campus. These values are ideals. They are expectations for behaviors. They're not behaviors themselves. So if you ask someone, what is respect? And they give you an example, no, that example is going to be conditional. It's going to have boundaries and exceptions that their example of respect will probably only apply to certain contexts and situations and circumstances. And so that's what I mean. Like having a shared understanding of values is going to play into how these outer layers, these elements of culture are designed. And so there's this interdependence of elements of culture and values and how we understand them and interpret them and share them with each other. And so, when we tell a kid to be respectful or we say, be responsible with your things, what are you talking about? What do you want me to do? Because at this point, if I don't understand what you're saying, all I'm going to do is try to stay out of trouble. And that's not what responsibility is supposed to do. This concept of responsibility is a value. We want to instill that in, our youth. But we're not actually able to identify exactly what it means. And so instead, we set rewards and punishments for specific behaviors without actually explaining what responsibility as an ideal actually means. And that usually stems from the fact that we haven't really teased out what these mean for ourselves and as a school, as an organization, as a group of humans collecting for the purpose of educating and sharing and improving ourselves as people, we don't have a shared language and shared understanding of these values. So that's the fourth layer. This third layer, I'm just, no one is, I don't see anybody in here. Nope, just me. So I'm going to keep going. This third layer, this light blue area, this is actually one that most teachers are probably familiar with: self-awareness and management. And then down here, social awareness and relationships. This is the social emotional learning aspect of schooling that's become more popular, increasingly popular since the 1990s. Um, how we manage our emotions and whether we manage our emotions very well is just one aspect of self-awareness and management. And self-efficacy, goal setting, reflection, these are things that we think students are learning, but as someone who went through the public education system, in elementary school, in middle school, in high school, I know they tried. but unless the school is working with the community and the parents and the families and are all on the same page about, again, what things like responsibility mean, if the teachers and the parents aren't on the same page, and that's hard because all the parents have different beliefs and even the teachers have different beliefs, so you have to get on the same page with that, which is difficult. But unless you're going to go to such lengths that the school is going to reflect the values and the elements of culture of their community, then the school is going to end up sending mixed messages about how to manage emotions, how to recognize and acknowledge and work with your own self-efficacy, your self-confidence, your self-esteem, and set goals and reflect on those goals and manage your progress of learning. I mean, all of that has to do with how we see respect, responsibility, fairness, trust in others, trust in ourselves. So you can see how these layers start to become more interdependent, even though they are distinct layers with their own purpose for being in this model, separate from the other layers. Within that third layer, we get into this multicolored red, green, dark blue. This is the second layer, and it gets pretty intense pretty quickly when we get into the second layer and this first layer, because the second layer, pride, wittiness, temperance, courage, magnanimity, friendliness, and honestly, magnanimity, it's just a fun word to say. But magnanimity is a characteristic. It's an attribute. It's something that you can't pinpoint. You can't put a number on the magnanimousness of a person, because how much they give, not just of things, not just how much money, not just things, but how much do they give of themselves to others. That's the prodigality. Is somebody who is prodigious, who has a high level of prodigality, is going to give themselves to the point of excess where they no longer have anything for themselves. And that is kind of a vice when you think of characteristics and attributes of a person. But on the other side of that coin, you have the miserly one, the miserliness of a person, the Scrooge McDucks of the world, where they keep everything to themselves, not just things, not just money, but emotionally they keep themselves, real close to their chest, what they feel. And so this idea of balancing how much you give, it plays into this whole concept. It plays into that outer layer of empathy and perspective. How much can you give to someone else, and how much are they going to take if you allow them that interplay, that interpersonal skill set of recognizing and setting your own boundaries. And when there's a conflict, knowing how to approach that conflict so that it can be resolved in a way that, yeah, maybe it's not a positive resolution, but it does get resolved. And so that's, you know, the second layer, this pretty red and green and dark blue, they are ranges of characteristics and attributes. So that's a really fascinating look into the individual as it applies to the social relationships, as it applies to the fourth layer of trust and community and integrity, these values that we believe in, and all of it, which is driving our understanding of elements of culture, the norms and traditions, how we decide how a classroom is going to make decisions, who's in charge and why, and is it more egalitarian or is it more hierarchical? All of this plays into how who we are and how we learn. And so, at the core of this is the first layer, the inner layer, which is based on the 5-factor model of personality traits. It's a personality trait theory, and it is the most popular one out there. It's pretty cool. There's a lot to get into, and the more you understand yourself as an individual, the more you're going to understand how certain characteristics are. Some people are going to have a tendency towards some attributes and characteristics more than other people who have certain personality traits that are more prone to maybe the opposite of that trait. So some people are going to be self-indulgent. Some people are going to be a little more insensible with how much they temper and reserve and restrict themselves. And so, all of that plays into how we understand the way certain people are going to manage their emotions and how we're going to build their self-efficacy as a person in a way that doesn't step on the toes of other people, that is not empathetically irrational, that is reasonable from an interpersonal perspective and approaches conflicts in ways that appropriately resolve them so that the goal of the learning environment, the goal of the classroom is kept intact. So, again, it's a lot, and it makes more sense to take a classroom and say, all right, let's just identify the elements of your culture as a classroom. Like, as the teacher, are you the one making the decisions? Traditionally, yeah, the teacher's the one who's going to be making the decisions. Now, they will listen to students, they will give students options, but it's typically the teacher's classroom, and that's a really popular perspective. And so, you get into leadership styles, you get into relationship patterns, codependency, and a lot of those things. And then you look at norms and traditions, and you start to make the connection that the norms and traditions that are in place are actually working in tandem with this preference for a more autocratic approach to teaching and learning. I teach, you learn. The quality of your learning depends on the quality of my teaching. That's not the only way to run a classroom. And the problem is, a lot of teaching prep programs, that's the primary teaching philosophy taught. So that's where I like to use this as a way of having a conversation for helping teachers to reflect on the kind of classroom culture they've created. And then from there, we can dig a little deeper and talk about how they define certain values in relation to those elements of culture. And so from there, you can start to compare with the other classrooms on a school campus and be like, all right, I can see how there's not really a shared understanding or a shared language of these things. That's where you might want to go to the school as a whole and start to reflect on whether or not it's worth opening that can of worms and creating that shared language and creating that shared understanding within the staff about what respect, responsibility, fairness, trust, community, and integrity actually mean, and how we want that to be instilled in our students. And so that's where, that's only the fourth layer. And then as I work with teachers to go deeper into this layer, into these layers, and we start to reflect on who they are as a person and how that is reflected in the kind of culture of classroom culture that they're creating. Yeah, it's a lot, but it is worth it, because once you're able to backwards map why the norms and traditions in that classroom exist the way they are, once you can backwards map the fact that the personality of a classroom is a reflection of the personality of the teacher, once you make that connection and you really see that, yeah, that's a thing, then you can start to see how some of the students coming into your classroom and are just always in a bad mood. They're great for other teachers and they're just not working for you in your classroom. It might be because their personality is conflicting, not with you personally, but just with the environment that you've created, because you've created an environment that is limited to only those who work well in the same kind of environment that you work well in. And so looking at that and saying, well, that's just the way it's got to be. Well, no, it isn't. And so it's it's going into that conversation and, with an open mind, looking at why it matters for that student that might conflict in that kind of learning environment, where the way they organize their thoughts might conflict with the way you're expecting them to organize their things. Those kinds of ideas are where we really get into helping teachers in a traditional schooling environment, helping teachers who hold a very traditional schooling mindset, where we can start to at least identify where their identity ties in with their practices, so that once we can make that connection, we can ask the question and offer information about how we can help not just the students who are just good at school, but how can we help all of the students to become the kinds of self-directed learners we know they can be. And that ultimately is my goal. And so, that, I think I'm pushing 30 minutes, so I'm going to call it. I didn't see anybody enter the space. Maybe I'll check the link in the description below, but ultimately, anybody who wants to dig deeper into this model, please reach out. Come on in. I will check the link. And if I'm not here in this space, you can always send me an email or visit my Calendly and schedule a time to meet with me. But yeah, that's I guess that's going to do it for me. So everyone out there that's watching, that does watch the recording here, thanks for watching and thanks for coming, and I hope to talk with you soon. All right.